Debunking politics is as simple as accepting that war is valid so long as it does not bring about eternal death, and that war applies to every aspect of life, and that there is no restriction to war except when it comes to that which eternally cycles permanently, drama, because that would merely accelerate war in a way that it becomes out of control. Because one is supposed to not be too restrictive about war, but rather enforce, in a black and white context, that which is a threat to one's lifestyle, right? There's lifestyle, there's quality of life, and then there is that which is, so there's the pressure-based experience of living, which is about enforcement and is technically black and white only because it's about the pattern of creation, which is the one rule. And then there's the enforcement of living life, which is pressure-based. And a person needs to be aware that not all is fair in love and war, except that one knows how to separate war from pseudo-love, right? When love and war mix, it becomes drama. It's not about the actual original enforcement of not being lied to, not being cheated, not being stolen from, not being harassed, not being assaulted, not being raped, not being murdered, right? You have the right to lie, cheat, steal, harass, assault, rape, murder, as long as you're not bringing about eternal death. Here are the 7 sex centrisms that have eternal death if you do not satisfy the 4th column of sex validation, valid sex, all right? There are the earlier 3 columns that are not valid sex. And this is really what defines politics, because sex is the transpositional analogous hierarchy access, right? Sex is the microcosm to the macrocosm of the pattern of creation, meaning the body tells a story, and tells a story that is technically apathetic, technically empathetic, technically sympathetic, technically pathetic, right? And so because the body does not exist as anything other than a tool, the body is a tool, and the body does not produce meaning by itself. That means one has to distinguish the 4 aspects of what is called Lilithianism, the story of Lilith, which is a very sexual female that represents the universality of sex appeal, right? Because there's an actual response to the potentiality of an eternal trauma, a drama, blame, shame, and guilt cycle if one engages with the male pertaining to one's potential eggs. All right, so everyone should be protecting their stem cells and eggs, because stem cells can be turned into eggs, and you don't want to have a complex relationship that is not in line with the pattern of creation. And let me explain what those 4 aspects are. So the first 3 not valid sex topics are aphrodisiacs, the mind, where it's technically about manipulation, and the head, where you are in relation to the body, trying to separate identity from the body itself, even though the body is the third identity centrism, because the number 3 represents compositism. You have to kind of not be material centric, right? Saying that aphrodisiacs are not a valid sex infusion is because you're not being independent. You're not actually being natural. You're supposed to use the natural aphrodisiacs in accordance with the natural mind, in accordance with the natural head, meaning that it's still attached to the body and is developed, right? Where you're not actually trying to make something work, where functionally it doesn't. Even if there's licky-licky, you're not supposed to deep throat a little baby because you can't. And if you try to force it, it clearly is it's assault and battery, and in a context that is sexual, therefore it becomes doubly a problem. Therefore, you're actually, the concept of sexual abuse is a little foreign to me, but it exists in the context that it's not supposed to be associated with consciousness. It's not. And so the only valid principle regarding sex is the higher idea, meaning that the ritual of sex actually has a manifestation that doesn't leave oneself and the other person remaining in a solipsism, meaning sex is about progression, it's about improvement, it's about healing, right? It's not merely about the master-slave complex that is a stupid game of King of the Hill. One is supposed to surrender to a higher cause, not the partner. The partner is not the higher cause. There's one rule, and that is the pattern of creation. I was never my mother's body, therefore you didn't get to decide whether or not I had an identity. You could murder me, but the logic contending that I'm the same identity as you is what I disagree with. And it kind of goes to the points that I made in the Debunking Divorce video, which I go into the topics of what motivates divorce, right? So there's, in actuality, the feminism movement that is a panentheist etherealism, right? So anytime that is introduced, one's not serving a higher idea, one's destroying the original idea, which is about serving something beyond oneself, which is why we lose consciousness when we orgasm, because we're supposed to be separating the idea from ourselves. And nothingness, the span of nothingness, it's like physically cutting off this and separating oneself from one's posterity, from the next generation, in indicating that there's a hierarchy. And when that hierarchy is being mixed with another hierarchy, that is what is called monohierarchy. And monohierarchy is the idea behind equality, which is the next point that I'm trying to make. And monohierarchy does not actually exist, and those that act toward it are destroying hierarchy by trying to mix hierarchies together or destroy hierarchy altogether in order for there to be one hierarchy. And that's not accordance to the one rule that is the pattern of creation. Then there is dealing with the narrative of being called racist, where it's actually about being anti-white, and it's anti-original 7 race fathers, because race mixing actually destroys both heritage, right? There's drama there because the person is trying to create a new hierarchy regarding the races when they're of the next generation of an interracial marriage. And there's also the organ donation compatibility that natural law penalizes. It is a natural law that race mixing and organ donation is punished pertaining to insurance regarding relationships in the medical context. And then there's the narrative of reincarnation, which deals with topics like resurrection insurance, which is where a person can actually go from male to female, as is demonstrated in nature, but ancestors still look down upon that because it's about you separating yourself from what ancestors already gave you. Basically, you're picking and choosing the gifts, the heritage that your ancestors gave you, and that is ancestor hate. You don't get to judge your ancestors. And reincarnation is a gestaltic rebellion where love loses its eternal purpose because of the line of authority where eternality comes from. It's not to be abandoned. You're not supposed to abandon ancestors, right? Getting a sex change is gestaltic rebellion. You're thinking that you get to have more than one heritage. You don't. You don't. And I'm not going to interfere with the decision of being available for a sex change in the resurrection process. But trying to get it done before that kind of drags other people into the drama, and it's not as sexual, and in actuality isn't sexual at all, and a perpetual gestaltism, gestalt means 2 images and 1 image, that's not healthy for anyone's consciousness, because it directly says you don't want people to know about your heritage. And that's what actually makes a person sexually attractive, not the other way around. Then there's consumerism, which is in actuality nihilism. When a person is all about materialism or just the experience, they're distinguishable. They're different identity centrisms. They're both valid. But being too nihilistic has a problem, right? Lilith is a sex demon for a reason. I'm not going to condemn Lilith in every context because she still represents something that has an appeal. So it's contextual, right? There's the higher idea that wasn't necessarily being served. And so it's being too judgmental pertaining to the sexual marketplace that can be a problem, which hypergamy technically is being too judgmental of the sexual marketplace. And, hate has its place pertaining to it, the excluding of that which has brought an eternal death, not that which is innocuous. If a person is ugly, I'm not going to condemn them eternally for having, during that mortal lifespan, genetic defects, right? It's kind of important. I'm not going to condemn people for being perpetually impotent pertaining to raping them, for instance, right? If a woman is with not enough energy and a man rapes her because she doesn't have the faculties to have consensual sex, it still technically invigorates her, right? That's not eternally condemned. There's genetic defects pertaining to dyseugenics. That is not condemned either, right? You can have sex with those people. So long as it's not bestiality, miscegenation, or the environment itself, because you can't reproduce with the environment. Technically with a tree, but you're not supposed to prioritize a tree because that's not only not available, there's a narcissism that is involved, and so genetic defects is really as far as you can go. And then there's sexual identity orientation problems that deal with not training, typically, right? If you have sexual identity orientation problems in the context of training to understand the male or the female, that's fine. But if you're trying to, in the context of the sixth point that I made in the divorce debunking video, immigration and DEI, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really a replacement narrative, right? Where it's subsidized in the context of theft, where you're corrupting the role because in truth you're supposed to fulfill a racial pride rather than try to do blackface and pretend that you are of some other sex, right? Trying to represent the other sex is basically the same thing as blackface. And, you know, there's also the resurrection insurance where you are presuming, it's replacement. You're trying to replace heritage. You know, because immigrant bacteria steal enzyme jobs. So all of these sexual relativists are technically akin to bacteria as promoted and propagandized by the medical community as they currently stand. Even though scientifically they're not actually necessary, I did my research, enzymes can do it all, and they can do it faster than bacteria, all right, by like 30 days. And bacteria doesn't even break it down, the food down, into a digestible form. It just breaks it down, and it's still, in a lot of cases, toxic, right? So there's no such thing as probiotics. And so bacteria steal enzyme jobs. And who's the enzyme? The naturally produced lineage of cells, which is analogous to the race, by the way. And then there's love as dogma. Now, let's talk about love as dogma. Let's talk about how that relates to pedophilia. Dogma is not peerdom. You need to actually be in peer to a little child before you start any sexual relations, right? There's something called the sacred dialogue. It is very extensive. The idea is about the unpackaging of what's going on to where the body is harmonized with the pattern of creation. A little baby's body is nowhere near the pattern of creation's scheduled function of what is considered normal. Little children are not normal. They're not the standard. There must be peerdom. A higher idea must be served. You can't treat a little child as an aphrodisiac. You can't treat a little child as a mind. You can't treat a little child as a head, meaning detaching it or only looking at them materially. You can only treat the little child as a higher idea. Why are you trying to create that which is already there? You're not intended to. You're literally trying to replace the ditto. It's a ditto because ditto, you're already a little child in terms of your own theosis, right? Your own development. And that's problematic, right? So technically, you can have underage marriages, but that doesn't mean you're having actual sex with them. Sex doesn't actually occur until there's no longer a threat pertaining to the body not being able to handle what's going on pertaining to aphrodisiacs, the mind, because sex is about transpositional analogous hierarchy, and the mind is not always able to deal with the ritual. The symbols in a ritual can be misprioritized. There can be fatal personality, misprioritization, misproportion, perpetual impotence. Literally, a child can lose their sexual attraction based strictly upon the context of the relationship, right? So I was experiencing my libido at the age of 4. I was a creep to my sisters at the age of 11. I didn't have the idea that sex is to be represented as. It's an ideal. It's more pleasurable if that ideal is served, because it's not the other person that you're actually serving. You're serving eternality. You're trying to know the story. It's kind of important for one's reverse engineering, which doesn't have to happen, right? You don't have to, you can develop being celibate and perhaps only masturbating, right? So it's important that you don't not believe in oneself and one's partner and also in the idea, because the idea is more important than you or them. And love is not about giving context, it's about processing context. And love can only be discovered when fate is actually imposed upon oneself. Peerdom, right? The little child, the ditto, is literally supposed to have a shared experience. It's not going to work if you try to treat them as merely an aphrodisiac, a mind, or a head, right? If they're not capable of separating themselves from government, having that rebellion, right, which is an adult thing to do, they're not capable of making the decision to responsibly have a dynamic with the idea through you. You're supposed to be a verb. They're supposed to be an adjective. But the law is still the noun that one is referring to as the anchor point, as you both have a shared adverb, I should say. You're both adverbing, right? You don't need to directly refer to what you're doing. You need to be capable of happily adverbing, right? It's how one carries through the experience, because it's a process, right? And then there's polygamy, and there's one valid form of sex with polygamy, including your sister, and that deals with risk management, because it's the man taking on too much risk. The woman represents liabilities, and it's about relieving her of those liabilities that can be pleasurable, but the problem is being in a solipsism is not being a conscious man. and to sacrifice one's own feminine by trying to replace that feminine with another female, the female doesn't represent all the feminine. Okay? You have to own the feminine before you are married to another female. Literally, you have to master your own desires. The desire is a wound. The wound is feminine. You literally have to understand the feminine before you think that you're a matured masculine. Okay? And it's risk management. It's the difference between being a man and a boy. Because a little boy plays with all the girls, right? The girls have fun with the little boy, and that's the next topic, polygyny, where, so what's the risk, ultimately, right? So it's eternal death if you can't resurrect your partner due to burden or drama, right? Trauma, blame, shame, and guilt. If it just becomes too much. So polygyny basically is loaded in regards to the insemination of the eggs. So long as the eggs are not inseminated, the woman can literally be an escort, prostitute, and even as a little girl have sex with her father. But the problem is she's not supposed to have eggs that are inseminated. Okay? So it's problematic because the female it's not about the unpackaging process that deals with what some women complain about pertaining to their own theosis of godhood, right? The narrative of the goddess. Look, the goddess developed after she was resurrected. She wasn't a goddess till after she was resurrected. Meaning that journey is not in this lifetime. And it's because you're to be provided for and taken advantage of in order to be taught. Because a woman is like an object. Perpetually impotent, right? You're basically a tool. And being unpackaged so that you can remain a woman instead of presuming that you're just going to become a man or that you get to do what men do, which is analogous to becoming a man because the rite of passage, look, you're taking for granted your childhood. Being a little girl means you're not being impregnated by any male, including your father. And I know you have daddy issues. I know you'll always have daddy issues. I know that those can be resolved according to schedules. But let's be honest about the actual schedule. Look, the schedule is you have an eternal consort, pick one, you may be guessing right. Always look for an eternal marriage, not divorce. Don't become delusional. I'm not trying to presume that females are always delusional. I don't believe that. I do believe that they can be competent. I do believe they can be competitive according to a hierarchical ratio, right? Not mono-hierarchy. I don't agree with sexual identity orientation problems. I do believe in sexual and racial segregation because nature enforces natural laws that say these exist, they are identities, respect humility and pride. They're supposed to have their own journey to godhood. And it's about not having other people have the opportunity to either steal an opportunity or think they're entitled to the property that is symbolic of opportunity, right? And polygyny kind of is this hypergamy concentration that is the problem. It's the sixth sex centrism, and it appears to be that it is analogous to claiming that the universe has the same black hole that it had eons ago. And look, the vagina is still linear. It's merely a collapsed cardinal, right? And gamma rays escape out of the poles of black holes. There's an event horizon that consciousness permits, pertaining the perception of how to comprehending a toroidal structure. Don't confuse your toroid that you defecate out of with the toroid that your little children would come out of. Be a little bit more pragmatic. You know, this isn't a suggestion. It's naturally enforced. Okay? So don't think that you're all feminine. You don't have to be ashamed of being essentially an irreversible, evolved male, because the soul is masculine and you're never going to be male materially in the biological form that you have. And I'm telling you, it's better to be appreciative of the almost paradoxical, which is part of the event horizon, right? Where there's this promise that circles exist, which they don't, right? There are archetype sets, numbers representing corners, pi being actually calculable and given context by these two things, right? And that it has a beginning and an end when you draw a circle, and also that, you know, it breaks apart, females kind of give a context to a finite universe. They represent value in a form of a scarcity that's different than the scarcity that males are able to enforce. And so it's important to value celibacy. And I'm not against responsible escort services. It's just that it's better not to make drama that is not with an eternal consort only. Which brings me to the next sex centrism that politics is actually about, that deals with edophilia, right? Where the son having sex with the mother is a matter, it's a topic, it's a subject. The fourth column that validates a son having sex with the mother involves the mother literally not having eggs, meaning she can't be impregnated, and she's literally using the least amount of effort to prevent her son from impregnating another woman. Where it's literally hedonism gone awry, and she's joining the fray to save her son from an otherwise eternal death. Now, the father probably isn't going to be bothered by this. The reason why I say this is because as long as he doesn't have to know, meaning there's never any concern for a fetus in the first place, it can be problematic if the son becomes feminist and tries to think that he's going to have a sexual transition into being a woman, or just doesn't care about the father doing that in order to sort of rationalize what's going on and damn everything and no longer be the father, through a sex transition with resurrection insurance. Look, fathers lose their resurrection insurance, and that's one of the reasons why hermaphrodites, if they impregnate themselves, won't be resurrected. And so it's important for people to know that creating drama by being self-centered is to be avoided, because it's about the higher idea. I can't say that enough. It literally is only that validates sex. And if a person isn't serving that cause, it's fine to explore, as long as it's safe, in the context that you're not making an eternal narrative by creating a new lineage or trying to destroy one. That is. And that's basically what all politics is about. And therefore, lying, cheating, stealing, harassing, assaulting, raping, murdering is perfectly okay, so long as it is in regards to fighting against quality of life threats and eternal death.